Hello, everybody. My name is Ken Siladi. I'm the Conference Minister of the Connecticut Conference, and we are glad that you're joining us for this webinar today. We want to welcome our guest, Dr. Alice Hunt, who is the Executive Director of the American Academy of Religion, formerly for a decade, the dynamic president of Chicago Theological Seminary. And she is also the vice chair of the United Church of Christ board. Not any longer, she's shaking her head. She was the vice chair of the United Church of Christ board. So Alice, welcome. We are glad you're here, and we are going to let our panelists introduce themselves. Ken?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ken Peterkin. I'm the minister at the Essex, Connecticut First Congregational. Thank you for joining us today. The program today is a result of my attendance at a Connecticut conference program about a year and a half ago. That program was entitled Rape Culture and Violence Against Women. At that meeting, I expressed my disappointment with Kent that so few male clergy were in attendance. It was then that I was determined to bring yet another program forward that would address the same topic in a way that men hopefully would register. And honestly, depending on the online turnout today, I may try again if I don't see enough people registering, but I hope our discussion can allow for an opening of the heart in more men about how we see and treat others. So thank you all for being here today. I'm going to open this up with Dr. Hunt with the first question. Dr. Hunt, you've done a lot of work on gender roles in your career, and you use the phrase as entitled today's program, toxic, cisgender, ableist, white, heteronormative masculinity. Can you break that down for us and say anything else you'd like to do to introduce us?
Thank you so much. Thank you for your persistence on this question. Thank you for noticing when you were at the rape culture meeting that it was mostly women in attendance. Thank you for your tenacity on this issue. That's what is required. I use the term toxic, cisgender, ableist, heteronormative, patriarchal masculinity because I get frustrated when I hear the term toxic masculinity. The term toxic masculinity implies that masculinity is toxic, and that therefore all men are bad. Kind of. I mean, those are the rolling assumptions that go with that. So the problems that we're dealing with because of male privilege come because of all the things that I added on top of it. It's cisgender, ableist, heteronormative patriarchy that is toxic. And so, but before I kind of break that down, I want to try to make this approachable for people. All of us have privileges of some kind, and when we have privileges, we don't have to notice that we have privileges. Like the world I live in doesn't force me to notice that I'm white. I just am. So the way I approach this with people is to ask how many left-handers are in the room. Are any of you that I can see left-handed? Oh, see, we got one there. Siladi's left-handed. So, okay, Rev Kev, you're left-handed too. So those of us who are right-handed never have to notice the stuff you left-handers have to deal with to be left-handed, because our right-handed, yes, scissors. So you could give me a long list. Our right-handedness is normative. You know, when you go to buy a baseball glove, you have to look for left-handed baseball glove. When I go to buy a baseball glove, it just says baseball glove, because that's what is the standard in society. So how many of us right-handers go around and say righties rule? How many of us wake up every day and say, I'm going to get together with the right-handers and we have an identity group? Or how many of us say, I am so tired of those left-handers slapping their left hand in my face. I don't make a big deal about being right-handers. Why should they make a big deal about being left-handers? Or I didn't ever oppress left-handed people. I don't have any history of that. This is a level playing field. Why don't the left-handers just get on and do what they need to do to be successful in the world? You can see how that trope gets carried on and on. And when we approach the notion of privilege from right-handed and left-handed, it's easier to see the complications with privilege. Whereas if I come at you because of your male privilege that you didn't ask for, right? It's not something you created. You didn't ask for it. That's the issue with it. It's unearned. So the conversation about masculinity is to help us think, to help us get on a journey. It's not to point fingers, it's not to blame, but the fact of the matter is that the toxic, cisgender, ableist, heteronormative, patriarchal, and racist masculinity harms all of us. It doesn't harm some of us. It doesn't harm just women. It harms men as well.
So this is Rev Kev. I'm the minister at Center Church on the Green in New Haven. What motivated you? What got you into this field?
Thank you for asking that. Wow, my life, Rev Kev, my life. I mean, you know, once you see something, you can't unsee it. And so it's not like, so I don't think that truth is a dawning. I think truth comes to us in momentary revelations. We grow and grow and grow to learn the truth. And so this has been a journey for me, just like working on my white privilege has been a journey for me. I'm motivated because I see the harm that comes, not just to women, but to men. I see men struggling to do what they're socialized to do, which is that the only acceptable emotion is anger. And how do men be in the world, given that men have been raised and socialized in this toxic, cisgender, ableist, heteronormative, white, patriarchal masculinity? So I'm motivated to do this because it's affected me, because I'm part of it, and because I'm not saying I'm exclusive of it, right? I have participated and I have allowed. I have been willfully ignorant about the water that I swim in. So I'm motivated because now I see just a little bit and I can't stop seeing it, and I got to work on it. And we all, I mean, that's the same thing that Ken was saying in the introduction. He got to do something. You got to do something.
Thank you.
I'm Reverend Jack Perkins Davidson. I'm the senior pastor at Spring Glen Church in Hamden, Connecticut. And what you just said segues nicely into this next question that we have for you. I've seen a bunch of memes on Facebook that say, what does non-toxic masculinity look like? And then it'll have like a picture of Mr. Rogers or Terry Crews, or, you know, to try and provide some positive examples of masculinity to counter that toxicity. So, and right before we started this, you and I were having a conversation about sort of that it's not a binary, that there's a little bit of both in all of us. So can you speak to things that we can do as men and to help move in new directions and help lead towards a healthier model of masculinity?
Thank you for that question. And when I hear someone say, is this healthy masculinity or toxic masculinity, it does, like you say, there's a binary there that is not necessarily helpful, because toxic masculinity makes it want to throw away men, and I don't want us to throw away men. And just like we want the binary of somebody's racist or not racist. Well, it's not that simple. I am a white person. I was born with white privilege. I didn't create it. I was born with it. I benefit from it. It's an unearned privilege. Am I racist or not racist is oversimplified, because racist things happen in me and out of me without my knowing it. And I also do things by choice, and sometimes not, against racism and white supremacy. And so I think in the same way that you as a man are not either a healthy masculinity or toxic masculinity, you embody both, and it's how we become conscious of what's going on with ourselves and the work that we do. So sometimes people ask me, well, they say, you've really screwed up my understanding of what being a male is. You've just really messed me up. How am I supposed to go about being a man? What does masculinity mean? And I say, it's very simple. Be human. Finish.
I'm going to push back on that. Maybe there's some more nuance there. What you just said reminds me of the, people who say, oh, I'm colorblind, right? I just see humans. And there's still like a microaggression in there in erasing and overlooking the problem, right? So can you speak more to what you mean by be human?
That was an oversimplification, and I appreciate the pushback. Just like if I try to describe what should characterize femaleness, it's going to come down to being a decent human being in the world. And I don't know if you've ever seen this. It's a TED Talk by a guy named Jerry Kang, K-A-N-G. It's called Immaculate Perception, and it's about implicit bias. So the reason I'm telling you about this is because even if we become totally aware of all the things that bring about toxic cisgender, ableist, heteronormative, patriarchal masculinity, and we're still going to have in our bodies implicit biases that are just so normed into us that it takes a long time of awareness to overcome. But healthy is, we're talking the examples in those memes you've seen, Mr. Rogers, the other people. What's the basic characteristic is respect for whoever you're engaged with, as a complete self-respect, honoring their intentions, being in the world to be good for the whole world. Oh goodness, am I talking about UCC value statements? So I think that's where we want to move. So we want to get away from asking binary questions like, well, is the man a protector or not? Well, we all ought to be protectors. We all ought to be nurturers. So yes, I oversimplified it in one way, and in other way, not so much.
Thank you, Alice. My name is Eric Olson. I am proud to serve as the pastor of the Norfolk, Connecticut UCC Church. And you mentioned UCC value statements, which is a great segue into my question, which really has two parts specific to church. We are a church group on this chat, and presumably speaking somewhat to UCC folks out there. And so the first part of the question is, how has church perpetuated the perspective that you are critiquing? So that's the first part. And then of course the second part is, we're in the sort of, the restoration business, the healing business. How is the church uniquely positioned to help us move out of this toxic framework?
I am hearing some feedback. So the church has really perpetuated this for a long time. If you look at the UCC data on our churches, the leadership in those churches, largely straight white males. We've done some work around that, and I think there are good intentions around making our world be a different place. I believe that our UCC has gotten caught up in, with good intentions for diversity, but we've gotten caught up in being satisfied with optical diversity, and optical diversity is insufficient. We have to have real diversity at the table, in the conversations, making decisions. And that real diversity brings discomfort for those of us who have lived in privilege for so long. It's more trouble for those of us who have lived in privilege to operate in systems that have real diversity. So I understand why we've opted for optical diversity, but we should not be patting ourselves on the back about that. How can we move forward? Well, this is a step. I see 5 men who got together and said, we got to do something about this. You're the ones that have to do something about this. I can do something about male privilege, but it's on you. You can make a difference about that. Just like all of the white people on here can make a difference around race. All of the straight people on here can make a difference around sexual orientation issues, and on and on and on. I was in a situation one time where I called someone out on a gender issue because no one else in the room did it, even though I was one of the younger people at that time in the room. After that meeting, a senior straight white male came to me and said, Alice, I'm so glad you said something. I couldn't. Dude, you're the one who should have said something. And so I encourage us to be disruptors. We don't have to be in your face yelling at people to disrupt. We can just be gently pointing out, calling, and we can go after big things, and we ought to also go after little things. And, like telling a woman she should smile more. Why? Do I ever come up to Kent Siladi and say, Kent, you should smile more? Or not commenting on the clothes that a woman has on, or not talking over a woman. Just watch now for that and see how often that happens. Claiming credit for an idea that a female said just 10 minutes before, and all of a sudden it's your idea. I mean, I got a long list if you want the long list. So I think we need to do things on an individual basis in our churches. We ought to be having awareness conversations. They don't have to be slap people over the head. They can be introduced gently. And we ought to be doing it on a larger systemic level, like you're doing in your conference right now. If people want to do the right thing. So if I tell you today, I want to be fluent in Spanish. Tomorrow, am I going to be fluent in Spanish? No. I might be able to say, hola, dígame, ¿cómo te llama? But if you want to be fluent in Spanish, you've got to practice it and exercise it. Just the same, if you want to have healthy expressions of how you are as a human being, it's got to be practiced. It doesn't come overnight.
Thank you.
Did I get at your question?
Yes, thank you.
Well, and I'll just sort of reflect on that last comment about that. That happened with me in a conversation with me, a white female and a black female, and the white female said something that I was appalled at. And back then I had no clue that I was responsible, that I should have said something.
Yeah.
And the Black female, though, afterwards, when I said to her that I was appalled at what was said, she says, well, why didn't you say something, for crying out loud?
Right. Right.
So, you know, again,
That's part of your journey.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, right. So we're all obviously local ministers, and we have our own settings, and we have our own, of course, social circles and such. So we're doing this today, of course, which is great. But what else can we utilize then in the future if we want to start a conversation in our own settings? What resources can we turn to and utilize so that we can do this in a way, like you said, that's not going to bash people over the head, but bring forth a discussion that's going to be listened to and people are going to be willing to enter into.
So there are so many avenues of approach for this. I think you got to know your setting and know, like, if you really want to be daring and just jump in the deep end, then I would suggest setting up a social educational gathering where you read together Lily Loeffler's essay, The Female Price of Male Pleasure, and have a conversation about it. But you got to be ready. That's the deep end, right? So, but you could find a book that you think is a gentle introduction. I'm for gentle introductions. I think that's better. You have small successes, just like a toddler learns to walk and fall down and walk and fall down until they run. You could invite somebody in to have a conversation. You could use a 5-question discussion group, but you need to have somebody there to facilitate, I think, in most cases. And I think you have to acknowledge that you or whoever is not the expert. I'm not the expert on any of this. I just have done some work around it. I'm still on my journey. I'm still seeing all the ways I'm complicit with this toxic cisgender, ableist, heteronormative, white, patriarchal masculinity, how I play into it. So I think you have to acknowledge that you don't have it yet. You're just working on it. But do it. Just do something. Michael Gilligan, who's the head of the Luce Foundation, told a story one time. He said that his nephew, 2-year-old Sam, was approaching his 2nd birthday and had never said a word. And they decided they were going to have a party for Sam. They had balloons and the blowers and the hats and cake and ice cream. And they're all sitting around and everybody's talking. And Sam's sitting at the end of the table. And they give him the first piece of cake and the ice cream. And everybody's talking and doing everything. And Sam's over there fidgeting and moving around. And all of a sudden, the ice cream is rolling off, melting off the cake and rolling towards Sam. Sam yells, "Somebody do something!" We have to do something.
So the question I was going to ask is, whose work is this? But you kind of answered that. You said it's our work. Whoever you are, it's our work. But then you led into saying that it's the people that have that privilege, who is especially expected to speak out in this when we confront any of these behaviors. But one of the things that and I asked you about this a little bit beforehand, the use of white,
Yeah,
your description. And as I said then, I'm perfectly willing to allow white people to be responsible for most of my problems. That may be true, but we can get into that. That's another conversation. But can you talk a little bit more about why you chose that? And I know you're not leaving me off the hook.
I am not letting you off the hook at all. All I want to acknowledge is that you're dealing with masculinity issues and mine are interlocked with how we are socialized to deal with white supremacy. and can't be shaken. And if you look at our society at large, the only people in our society who don't have to see any kind of privilege are the cisgender, ableist, heteronormative, white patriarchs. They're the only ones who don't have to notice privilege. I'm also claiming that we all are having willful ignorance around this expression of masculinity. But no, Rev Kev, I am not letting you off that hook. Man, you got work to do too.
Oh, I don't, I know it.
So in that piece about privilege, one of the questions we wanted to ask was what you've learned in your work, and I'm going to put a particular lens on that. What have you learned about the resistance of the privileged to encounter this topic and the sort of defensiveness that comes when you bring up this topic? And how do you counter that, and how should we sort of let down our own defenses and help others let down theirs?
Wow, what a loaded question. Well, we had a prime example in resistance to the conversation in King David, and the prophet Nathan saying, "Thou art the man." There was a study out of UC Berkeley in 2013 with using the game of Monopoly to see how people deal with wealth. And they picked 100 people and put them in random pairs and had them play Monopoly for 15 minutes. For one person, they randomly chose to get double the amount of money. That person also got to use 2 dice. That person got double every time they pass go. And in the beginning, in the experiment, the 2 people would look at each other like, what is up with this? And by the time the 15 minutes had passed, the study shows that the person who had been given the privilege and the benefit was pounding their piece around the table and gesturing in success and changing the narrative so that the narrative explained why that person had earned the extra. So privilege always wants to protect itself. And privilege doesn't want to give up privilege. So the only thing I know that makes a dent, even if it's a small dent, is awareness, a desire to learn, and a desire to grow. That makes it difficult, and it makes it challenging, but it's not a simple fix. It's so with my racism, dealing with my white privilege in a white supremacist environment, every day is a journey for me. I have never arrived. I make mistakes even when I have good intentions. I continue to benefit from my white privilege even when I wish things would be different. So what am I doing every day to combat that? Whether it's calling out a white friend when they do something, whether it's working against a systemic issue in an institution or society, writing an op-ed, doing workshop. I think we each have to pick the places where we're called to address these questions.
So Alice, you mentioned King David. Obviously, this is not a new dynamic. It's a long-standing issue. But can you talk about why this is so fresh and so important today?
Well, for me, it's fresh and important because the more awareness I have, the more frustrating it is. And I seem to sense that from each of you too. The more awareness you have about this, the more urgent it becomes. And the explicit nature in which we're seeing white supremacy, white nationalism, patriarchal masculinity in this society is bone chilling. It's not that it hasn't always been there. And we do need to deal with explicit expressions like using blackface. But using blackface is a symptom of the embeddedness in the DNA of our country with white privilege. And it's the same with this particular expression of masculinity.
So we are so grateful to you, Alice, for this conversation. I want to thank you for giving us your valuable time for this. We have just scratched the surface, right, of this conversation. And our hope would be that we would continue the conversation along the way with this team and others who are interested in keeping that going. I want to thank our panelists for their time today and the questions that they've asked. And I want to thank behind the scenes Tiffany Vale, who has made sure all the technology was in place in order for us to do this. So thank you everyone for looking in. Thank you, Alice, and our panelists for contributing. God's peace and blessings be with all of you.